This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Picking up on one topic that we missed last week because I think I talked too much on general stuff. But nevertheless, I thought I should bring back the Kano model. Who's been exposed to Kano model? Kano model? No?
Everyone has. I talked about it.
Oh, you talked about it. So shall I not talk about it?
I'll just brief.
I can briefly go through it. Okay.
It exists, and then Philip will talk to you about it.
All right. Okay. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about the Kano model, but I wanted to spend this morning, after having given you a bit of a brief overview of what quality is and what quality means, to give you a sense of when we go through the product development process, how do you go from picking up customer requirement and turn that, as I said, last week, what the engineer does is that we change dream into reality. Okay, that's kind of like what we do. But it's a question of, in the real world of engineering, how do you translate the idea into the hardware that delivers the product? Just wanted to take you through that process, the different stages of those processes, just to give you an idea when you go to work, what is that going to mean? Okay? All right, quality. We talk about quality is probably the most important thing, but it's very important to understand what quality means. What is quality? We talk about quality being durable, being delivering what people expect, easy to use, user-friendly, nice to feel and touch, nice to hold, and that kind of stuff. But sometimes it's very hard to define those boundaries. What are those things that really are important to drive qualities? And really to what extent do you go and engineer the product so that it is quality? So I thought I'll just show you a few things that I picked up. How if you're designing something to a certain requirement, how you can get a lot of use in different situations which will never sustain what you call quality. So I thought I'll pick that up. I think this is kind of like in usual stuff in Africa. Who's from Africa here? Anybody? No, all right. But in the third world, people will just load and load and load until everything's kind of like at the breaking point. So the question here, though, as an engineer, do you actually need to account for this kind of situation or not? Because really, in terms of engineering, if you were given total freedom in terms of the amount of money that you can use and the amount of time you have to design something, almost anything is possible. Okay, I'm sure if we were designing a truck for the army, okay, the truck would be quite straight, wouldn't have any problem carrying all these people. But for a commercial vehicle, it's not. So that's interesting about, what does the term quality mean? To what extent do you go to protect the use that the customer is going to put your product in? Have you seen this before, by the way? This is in Australia, by the way. Towing is big in Australia. Probably one of the few countries where we tow a lot. Well, actually, it's true and it's not true. We all think we're going to tow, but like all my cars, I get a car from the company. And every time I would order a tow bar with it. But if I use the towing once a year or at all on that car, it will be a lot. But I just feel that somehow I'm going to tow, and everybody have tow bars in their car, but we do tow a lot in Australia. The other market which is potentially similar is South Africa. But in Europe, there's not a lot of towing. In fact, at one point in the Falcon, where, I'm not sure you know, the reverse parking aid, rear parking aid, we have 4 on the rear bumper. And I was as I said, I was in the cost reduction department. We wanted to delete, instead of having 4 sensors, we wanted to have 3. So 1 on each side and 1 in the middle. that actually works okay if you don't have a toe pack, but if you have a toe pack, the toe bar gets in the way, which is interesting, so we couldn't do it. But a lot of Asian countries, if you go in India, for instance, a lot of the cars has got 2 sensors or 3 sensors. In Australia, we need to have 4. But anyway, this is in Australia. And the first time I saw this, I said, there you go. You see, you have to design for somebody pulling an elephant. But actually, I saw this one day. I was so disappointed because it's not actually an elephant. It's a paper mache. It's a paper mache elephant that somebody's built. And I thought, oh my God, that's a trick. But anyway, so towing for quality, what do you design? So this is another, I think this is a Peugeot, right? I think it's a Peugeot. What do you think is the problem with this? As an engineer, what will happen here? What's likely to happen? Topple over, right? The center of gravity has gone too high. So, you know, how do you accommodate this? There you go. This is overloading. So it must be in India. Who's from India here? Here you go. You notice the cows there? Who's been to, has everybody been in India? The one thing that you remember when you go to India, you remember all the cows on the road, right? It's an interesting, it's an interesting situation. And the train, okay. I don't know. This must be a festival. I'm sure that's not always, that's not always like this. But it's just amazing. It's a question of, if you're an engineer here, not designing the roof of the train solid enough and everybody falls over, are you liable? Are you not liable? Or the bridge, but for that matter, you think about the load on the bridge if you haven't designed for it. But anyway, it's just kind of like a visual show of, as an engineer, how far do you need to go? And it's very important. It's a very important question that you need to ask yourself. How far do you go to protect people, for misuse? Okay, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time, just brief, talk about Kano model. The Kano model basically is trying to depict and describe the process by which you need to assess what you need to deliver to the customer base. So Kano was a Japanese professor. So in his model, Kano identified 3 types of product requirement that influences customer satisfaction in different ways. Okay, 3 different ways. So so there are 3 different components in the Kano model. The first component of the Kano model is called basic quality. Okay, basic quality. So in essence, what basic quality means is that fundamentally, there's a minimum level of performance that the product needs to perform at. And if it is basic, that means the customer assumes that it's there. It's not going to get excited, if you give him any better basic quality. Like, if I'm driving a car, I expect that I put my foot on the brake, it's going to stop, right? I'm not going to say, oh my God, the brake is working, okay? Oh, that's so good, okay? Or the steering, oh yeah, the steering is very accurate. When I'm turning left, it actually is turning well left. So that's basic quality. I expect that to happen. Doesn't matter how much better I do it, even sometimes the feel of the steering, I'm not going to get excited because I expect it to be there. So that's basic quality. So the aspect of it is that in terms of basic quality, some of these needs are so fundamental that they are often not expressed by the customer. They don't even tell you that to them that's quality. They expect it, okay? But they are crucial and must be identified. Doesn't mean that because they're basic and fall into the basic category that they're not important. In fact, they're probably the most important aspect. It's almost like from a negative point of view. If you don't give it to them, that's when satisfaction really goes bad. Okay, you can give them as much good stuff as you want, but if the basic requirement is not met, the satisfaction goes really bad. The second component is what we call a linear satisfier. That is, the more and the better that attribute is, the more satisfaction you get. So this is to do with this provide increased satisfaction as performance improves. They are generally expressed by the customer. things like, hey, that sound quality, sound from my radio, sounds good. When I sit down on the seat, wow, it feels good. It feels like it's wrapping around me. It feels not too soft, not too hard. There's performance feel. When I put my foot down, I feel as though the car's got good acceleration. So that's a linear satisfier, okay? So it's important because you need to, within the constraint of your design, achieve the best you can, okay? And then there's the third component, which is known as the surprise and delight. This is the excitement needs, okay? Things that you give the customer that they were not expecting. Things like adaptive cruise. Anybody drives a car with adaptive cruise? The normal cruise control is that when you set your car to drive at a certain speed, you'll just maintain that speed. Okay, now it's a dumb system, okay? So if the guy in front of you suddenly decides to slow down and you are falling asleep, you just run into the guy. Okay, he does not know. The adaptive cruise has got some sensors that tells your car how far you're away from the car in the front, so that as the traffic in the front slows down, the system takes over and slows down to theoretically maintain a safe distance between the two cars. I know whenever I'm on the Western Ring Road, I keep on testing it. I'm thinking, my God, if one day that software is, got a bug into it, because I'm driving 100 kilometers an hour on the Western Ring Road, and suddenly the traffic's slowing down. I'm thinking, I'm going to test the systems here. I'll see whether the car stops. It doesn't stop completely. Once it gets down to about 20 kilometers an hour, it just gives you a signal that it's taken over. But it brakes very, it actually, I reckon the system won't have a collision, okay, if you're going, if that guy is stopped in front of you. I mean, so that's kind of like, when I was first using it, I went, wow, my God, this is so good. In fact, I rely on it now. If I don't have it, if I drive a car that doesn't have adaptive cruise, I feel unsafe. Okay. The other thing that I like too is that we have lane control. So there's a camera that actually looks at the lines on the freeway, or lines on the road. If you deviate or you cross a line, it vibrates on the steering, and it also is able to help you to bring you back online. So it's very important to say you're having a very long journey, for instance, right? And you're falling asleep, you're getting tired. Because how many seconds do you reckon you fall asleep before you crash into a tree?
But you fall asleep and you have an accident.
Yeah, or have an accident, but crash into a tree, right? You're driving, you're tired. You close your eyes to have a rest. How many seconds you reckon? 10?
5.
Very small. It's like 2-3 seconds. 2-3 seconds. At 100 kilometers an hour, 2-3 seconds, maybe, You think about it. 2 seconds is a long time. 3 seconds. 1, 2, into the tree already. I mean, you do the maths, at 100 kilometers an hour, if you're not following the road, how quickly you can go off the road. But anyway, that thing here just vibrate. But this is kind of like some of the, what I call surprise and delight into the car now, that's going to help autonomous driving. I saw an advert. From a Ford. The next Ford will have kind of like semi-autonomous driving, where if you're on the freeway, you just set it, right, and it'll drive itself. Okay, so you just sit, read the newspaper, whatever, and then the car will just drive by itself at the speed within safe range. It won't know how to, come off the freeway or whatever. But in the freeway, just follow the lane, follow the traffic, and it goes. So we're going there. But these are surprise and delight. I mean, it used to be surprise and delight. Used to be having a cup holder in the car. That's the first surprise and delight we ever had. Designing a cup holder in the car. That was really big, and we tried by providing a refrigerated compartment for the beer in the Ranger. That's the Australian surprise and delight. Power socket, and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, go.
Question at that point. Does it get, because you're a person that has to do this, does it get frustrating that surprise and delight year 1 becomes mandatory year 2 and then boring
Yeah.
year 3?
No, that's just evolution. That's just evolution. We know that surprise and delight don't last very long. Once people get used to it, they just take it for granted, especially when everybody else is having it. Because really, it's really about, in the terms of the surprise and delight, two things really. Giving the customer, your customer base, again, that's the other stuff you need to remember. Every brand has got their own following, customer following, right? You need to know what your customer like and want. Okay, like the Ford buyer may be different to the BMW buyer. Okay, you need to know what is it that you're looking for. But typically, when any of the major manufacturer get a surprise and delight, within 2-3 years, everybody's copying because the market respond to it. Okay, and so it's not surprising anymore because everybody else having it. Because just remember, always the product needs to be able to differentiate itself from other product. Okay, that's where surprise and delight comes in. So no, but you know, the one I'm still waiting for is karaoke in the car. I don't know how I'm going to do this. People like singing karaoke in the car, especially for Asia. Not watching movie in the car. No, that's not going to be good. But so these are the three components. But now it's very important in the design process to understand in terms of the attribute that you're focusing on, where do they fall into the category? Because again, through design process to be able to deliver quality and what the customer is looking for, you're always constrained by time, money, and resources, right? So you need to be able to do a good trade-off so that you get a good spread of the linear, satisfying, surprise, and delight. Basic quality is a given, okay? So you've got to have those. But how much effort and how much money you spend on each of those, because you can't spend too much time on surprise and delight, because you only need 2-3 for people to talk about. In fact, you give people too many surprise and delight, it becomes boring. You know, they're confused, right? You need to focus on just a few. But what Kano did also is that in terms of its graphical illustration, it's trying to show what we mean by basic quality, attribute quality, and excitement quality, which if you look at this red light in here, if the horizontal, the x-axis is degree of achievement in terms of the satisfier, right? The more satisfied, the bigger the x component. You see that as you provide more satisfaction, more quality in the basic quality, the achievement of satisfaction just flattens out. Doesn't because people assume it. But, however, look at it from a negative way. If you don't provide and if you fail in that area, then this dissatisfaction will go down very quickly. Okay? But if you look at the attribute, performance quality, you know, the more you give them, the more satisfied they are. But if you look at surprise and delight, it's just almost like, you know, it shoots up asymptotically. So it's very important. So recognizing the distribution or the categorization of these attributes helps you kind of like design a system that's balanced and, you know, potentially offer success. Okay.
Because you're the expert on all
Yeah.
this stuff. I've told the class, I showed pictures of Bugattis and things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. Excitement quality.
Yeah.
What's the profit margins? You know, if you know, basic quality you can keep increasing and you're spending money but not getting anything back. But when you go to that high end, like an iPhone or a fancy sports car, it just gives us some idea about what kind of profit margin you should be looking for the sake of surprise and delight.
Do you know, okay, so let me just answer it this way. I'm not exactly sure that we can separate each component, how much each one is worth. You need all of them. It's almost like for every model that we design, we've got to have, I mean, the program people and marketing people would insist on 2-3 surprise and delight. Must have it. And we don't necessarily put a value to that surprise and delight or to the performance quality. But what we put a value to is the quality, the basic quality. Because if some aspect of the system that we've designed the system fails, that costs money in warranty and repair. Okay? That's where That's where the money comes in. So maybe inversely, in answer to the question, the part of the those three components that actually can cost money is the quality, the basic quality. Because if you don't get that right, you're going to pay for it because you pay in warranty and repairs. If in the attribute and surprise and delight, because the extent to which people are happy with the seat comfort, with performance is very variable, right? It's a big spread, but it's not a fault, right? Because it's still working. It's like, wow, the sound quality of this audio system is so good. If you give them a little bit less quality, maybe 80% of the people won't even know because they don't have the ear to know the difference between that and the other. But you give them a car where you push the brake and it takes a long time for the car to stop or have an accident, you're in deep trouble. In fact, legally, you're in trouble anyway, right? So your basic quality is probably the most important component of the cost, where fundamentally, if you don't get your basic quality right, you're in trouble from a financial point of view.
It's fascinating because the basic, you talk about basic quality of iPhones, and I've got a friend who, Rich, he's got Ferraris, and he keeps on talking about how they keep breaking down.
Yes.
But he keeps buying them.
Yeah. But that's a different thing. That's like a brand image. It's like in society, when you see him driving a BMW compared to a Ford, the image comes. You drive a Bugatti or Ferrari, you're up there. It doesn't matter. In fact, Ford bought Jaguar, right? At one point, we used to own Jaguar. Jaguar had the worst warranty among all our range, worse than the basic Ford. And people are still buying it, because it's Jaguar. It's prestige, right? People buy prestige more than... So, there comes a point where prestige takes over, and they don't care. You think about some of the, a car like Rolls-Royce, for instance, right? They don't have the quality system that we have because they're not mass producing it. They're not. Everything is to a very strict tolerance because you can afford to do it. In mass production situation, we can't. So in fact, it's probably harder to design a Ford car than a Rolls-Royce. I would suggest, or a Ducati or something. But
thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The one thing that is important to understand, I think you mentioned that there's always a movement between surprise and delight, attribute quality to basic quality, always as a function of time, because people get to take for granted those surprise and delight that they assume at some point. So just some example of some basic quality, right? Constant pull drift to one side. If you're driving the car, you keep on having to correct the car because it keeps on drifting left because the alignment is not right, the steering is not properly calibrated. Engine hesitates and surges, when you're driving, it's hesitating. Unusual transmission noise, steering required extra and uneven effort, scratches on paint, vehicle vibrates while driving, poor idle quality, poor fitting. So this is the basic quality, right? If you don't get them right, then satisfaction comes down. In terms of attribute, so fuel consumption. Clearly, if your car uses less fuel and still got good drive, the more kilometers you get, the happier you are. Smooth transition, brake pedal effort, engine power, interior quietness, handling, quietness of engine, seat comfort, ease to drive. So all that comes in. The better it is, the more satisfied people become. Surprise and delight, one-touch parallel parking. People use this? I tell the story, but please don't think it's sexist or anything. There was one of the engineers lady, when the Focus just came out, one of the lady supervisors came and said, "Oh my God, I use this parallel parking. It parked in the car, and then I couldn't get out of it." Because the parallel parking is pretty good coming in, but it's very useful, very helpful. The one touch parallel. Voice command. Voice command is not, I must say, in most of the cars that I've driven, the voice command is not as good as Siri. Siri even understands my accent, but some of the car that I've tried, they just don't get, they're not very good. But voice command is important. Bluetooth, telematic, adaptive cruise control, storage, whatever. So these are kind of like example of surprise and delight. Okay, any questions so far? All good, all clear? Yeah, pretty. I think it's pretty common sense, really, in terms of the approach of segmenting what are the different types of quality that Kano defined. Okay, so I'd like to just give you some a bit of a perspective in terms of the product development process, especially in Ford. And I dare say that I think in most of the most product would, I dare say, have the similar kind of process. Okay, so essentially there are three phases of product development. The first one is really defining the customer, or more broadly speaking, define the customer want. Because I think last week we said that quality is very hard to define, except that it's mostly defined by expectation. What is it that the customer expects? What is it that you expect? So you need to define what are those expectations so that you can design. So put another way, what is the dream? What is the dream so that we can design to it? Okay, so you need to define the customer. And then you need to use that information to design the product. And then once you've designed the product, you need to verify, test it, and launch it. Because just remember, in most of the enterprise now, they mostly mass produce. Okay, so you need, part of launching it is to make sure that you can actually manufacture it to the design intent. Now, any Japanese in the room? Japanese? No? Yeah. Okay. Let me just give you an interesting difference between the way the Japanese go through the product development process compared to ours. I didn't quite realize that until I was teaching some technical courses around Asia Pacific, and I happened to be teaching some Mazda people. And I realized that in terms of their product development process, their approach is very different. In the Western approach, Ford, all the Western companies, mostly product development is led by the engineers and the designers, the development group. And once we've decided what we want, what's the customer want, and all this, we go ahead and design it. And then after we've designed it, primarily manufacturing comes in, the supplier and the vendor comes in to try and work out a way of making it. Okay? Now, traditionally, historically, that's been the way we do our product development system in Ford. But through the linkage, because we bought Mazda at one point, and we started learning how they did their job in a different way, especially when it involves quality. We adopted some of their process, but not quite, because culture is so hard to change. Once you're used to doing something, you don't want to change, even though you know it might be better. It's strange, really. But so in the Western process of product development, the engineers and the product development team is king. What we say goes. What we define and what we do goes. And then manufacturing has to come in to try and struggle to make it in a mass production situation to make it work as we had intended. And when they can't do it, we tell them that it's stupid. Because we're the engineer, we know best. Well, the engineers too, but in manufacturing, right? So, but when I was in Japan, it's totally different. Manufacturing are king. When you define what your product is, manufacturing goes in and tell you how you need to design the part so that it can be made in mass production, so that you constrain in a lot of ways to design stuff that suits manufacturing. Okay? Now, and let me tell you, personally, I think the Japanese approach works better, even though now Ford's try to adopt some part of that, most of our design process, integrate the supply base and manufacturing into the design process to have that voice to make sure that we're not designing something that cannot be made or difficult to make or costly to make. But we haven't gone as far as adopting the Japanese system where manufacturing is king. They are the people who's got the biggest voice. But in the Western system, product development has got the biggest voice. We are the master, so-called, if you want. But that's an interesting observation that's worth noting. So when you go to work, you should have a look and see what's going on there. But I would suggest that always designing something suitable for manufacturing is absolutely important, especially if you're in a mass production situation. Don't think that the engineer knows everything. He doesn't, because I was an engineer. I don't know everything about how to productionize or make things in mass production and how to make things work, but it's different. But in any event, so that's the process, okay? Define what the customer wants, design it, and then go and test it and launch it. Okay, firstly, voice of customer. Clearly, we need to do survey, we need to do focus group discussion. We need to also look at what is it that people are liking in other product to get an input into what we're going to include, how the next product, how's the next car going to look like. So we need the voice of the customer. Okay, so that's kind of, but interesting to know that as we're regionalizing, we used to be, as you know, or maybe you don't know, you're too young, but in Ford, we used to make cars just uniquely for Australian market. Like the Falcon. We used to design even, the Laser, especially for Australia, and GM used to do the Commodore, whatever. But you just cannot sustain having unique product for each market. So we're regionalizing and we're globalizing just for sheer costs. How much do you think it takes to? How much money do you think it takes to design a Falcon model? Have a guess. How many million? Any idea? 50? Yeah?
500 to $1,000 million.
Yeah. 50 to 60 million is a facelift. We've got a cycle of 3 years. We used to have a cycle of 3 years. In between the major model, we have a facelift. A facelift would be about 50, 60 million. But a typical whole Falcon program would be something between $400 and $500 million. That's big bucks, right? Big money. A global program, that's not here, a global program would be about $2 billion, $3 billion, something like that.
$1 billion.
Billions. I'm talking about an American program, a big program, billion, right? Now you think about rationalizing all these different car lines to globalize and regionalize how much money you save in product development costs. And then what we're basically doing now is that we're regionalizing our product, but also bearing in mind that different market has different expectation, different requirement, that the basic fundamental where people don't care is common, but where there are unique differences or requirement, you need to adapt to suit the market. Like in India, people like to blow their horn, right? They're beep, 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 beep. And in fact, when I go to India, I see truck says, please blow your horn. I mean, in Australia, somebody will kill you and strangle you if you horn at them, right? But in India, everybody says, please blow your horn. I remember I was in a committee for campaign and recall, and I was talking to somebody in Vietnam. There was a problem with horn failure in Vietnam. And I said, horn failure? That's no big deal. How often people use horn? I mean, I didn't go to Vietnam at that time. And he says, no, it's safety. If you don't have horn, you get killed. And it's interesting because he was on the phone into the meeting, and you could hear in the background, beep, 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 beep. So horn usage is important. Not so important in Europe or in here, but in India, in Vietnam, in China, it's very important. China? Who's from China here? Yeah, interesting. China is changing. There's a few cities where they're stopping people from blowing their horn, and this is an emergency. So that's shifting. But and there's different habit. Just give you an example. Here, this you need to know this. If you get involved into a product where that product is being sent to different countries, it's important to know. when I was in South Africa, people are much more polite in South Africa than Australia, by the way. You find that if you're on the freeway, there's only 2-lane freeway, especially if there's a truck or slow car, they will actually go in the emergency lane to allow you to pass. In Australia, they just won't allow you, right? If you try to pass them, they'll just keep on speeding to kill you, right? In South Africa, they're much more better driver. But what happens is every time I notice that somebody allows us to pass, they switch on their hazard light to say thank you. Okay? Now that's interesting because I'm thinking, oh my God, during the course of, I normally keep my car 9 months, 12 months. If I've used my hazard light once, it would be a lot of times in my own car. I'm thinking, my God, you think about the switch being designed for the hazard switch, okay? For Australia and the amount of testing we do on it, you put that in South Africa, the amount of use it gets is just, I don't know, hundreds of times or thousands of times. And you think as an engineer, you're starting to have hazard switch failure in South Africa, what will happen? So you need to know. And you don't want failure because once your reputation starts going, then it's very hard to recover the reputation. So you need to do your research first before you go to a market. In China, people like on automatic car, and in Taiwan too, when they driving the automatic car, at traffic, they put it in neutral. How many of you put your car in neutral in traffic? Do you? Okay, maybe there's a few, but I don't know. You do? You do too? Oh, okay, you've had the Asian influence. Because, I don't know, most of the people I know never change. Maybe it's just for the engineers. I don't know. But we never put our select onto neutral when we're in traffic. We just don't do it. And I'm thinking again, you think about there's some switches, some gears in that thing in here, right? The difference between a market who basically every time they stop, they put it in neutral. So the cycle of usage from market to market is different. So this kind of thing that you need to know and you need to be aware of. Otherwise, you're starting to get failure and you get warranty call, big costs, and you're the switch engineer and panic. You don't sleep for 3 months to fix the problem up, right? So you need to know about that. So in regionalizing, you need to understand the market well. But it's not only the customer expectation that's important. Basically, the requirement that goes into the book that drives us, guides us in terms of what we need to design for the car and what needs to be included. There are basically 3 branches of requirement. Clearly, the customer requirement is probably the important one, because if the customer doesn't like your car, they're not going to buy it, or they don't like your product. However, there's also regulation. Regulation? My God. Regulatory ones, okay? There's laws in every country, okay, that governs how your product needs to perform, either for safety or whatever. So you need to understand what the regulation, for instance, the VW problem they had, where they cheated the emission thing, that's a regulatory requirement. They're cheating, right? Well, kind of cheated. So you need to know what are the regulatory requirements. The third component is also what we call the corporate wants. That means that you want to be able to design a product that is able to differentiate itself from other products. Right? Because if the iPhone design something that's always look like a Samsung, it's not able to differentiate. So there's always a corporate want to drive and satisfy your own customer. I'm not sure whether you heard the term DNA. Okay, so there are certain wants that's part of our corporate DNA. It used to be that. For the Falcon, it used to be performance, feel, and family, which is sometimes very contradictory. Okay, we know that the customer base for the Falcon likes performance, feel, but also they like it to be able to be both a racing car and a family car. Right? They needed space for the family to take the family over the weekend, but during the week when they drive it, they want to feel like a racing driver. Okay, so this is kind of like DNA, what we call DNA. Safety became quite big, became part of what we call our DNA. Just like Volvo. Volvo used to be considered a safety car. That was part of their DNA. So you need to know, as an engineer, if your basic corporate want is that, then you need to design to it. So there's basically 3 elements. Okay, in terms of customer, who is the customer? You need to know your customer. Like I said, if I'm designing, a kettle, right? You can't just say, I'm going to target everybody. Okay, you need to know who's buying your brand. Is your brand cheap or the expensive? Is it for primarily family ladies or whatever? So you need to know who your customer, and just remember your customer changes over time. Okay, so you got what called the voice of customer. Who's buying your car? And in that, you need to do focus group, quality survey, media report, all that kind of stuff is what defines the customer. Customer input, an example, we had one of the Falcon that we drove where it was somewhat criticized because of ingress and ingress, getting in and out of the car. The rear door was too small, too narrow. And because it is a family car, we had big complaints. So, but it's interesting because once you've design the body, the opening for the car, you can't change it. It costs millions to change that body side. So we had to wait for the next model to change the shape to address the ingress, egress. But again, at that time, with the aging population, you always need to be mindful of, where's the market moving, if that's where your market is. Regulatory input, very important because, and again, regulatory input is very important because if you do not conform with one of the regulatory requirements, then you're dead. It's like you need to recall, if you infringe on one of the requirements, you need to do campaign recall. You can't sell your car. So it's very important to always meet regulation. Corporate requirement, business requirement, clearly make profit. Brand DNA, corporate standard, reusability, lessons learned, manufacturing technology. So that's essentially corporate requirement. The other thing that's important to understand is that in the old world, or in my world when I started, we always used to think of our design in terms of system. That we try to design to a certain system requirement. Like I was in the engine department, I say, okay, we need to design an engine to deliver 120 kilowatt, 300 Newton meter. That's kind of like where we start. We define a requirement through system performance. Really with the customer in mind, thinking that the more torque, the more power, the better it is. But we come to realize that the majority of the customer really do not understand power and torque. There's a percentage of the people who follows it, but most people don't know what, if you talk about, this is a good car, it's got 110 kilowatt and 300 Newton meter. Some of the people will say, oh, wow, this is good, this is better than GM. Yes, it is better. But, but what does that really mean, okay? So we realize that in terms of defining what the customer is looking for, it's better to not start with a system requirement, but to rather start with something that the customer understands, and we call that an attribute. Okay, so we need to redefine the customer requirement as an attribute rather than as a system requirement. So in there, for instance, a typical attribute in a car would be NVH, okay, noise and vibration and harshness. Like when you're sitting in the car, how much vibration is there in the seat, how much vibration is there in the steering, right? In the engineering world, define it as displacement per second, right? But that's not what the customer understands. Okay, you need to define it in a way that is that it becomes more subjective. So NVH becomes subjective. Performance, instead of maybe saying 100 kilowatt, you would say, okay, how quickly do you get from 0 to 100? Is it 6 seconds, 7 seconds? People understand that. Oh my God, I put my foot down in 6 seconds at 100 kilometers an hour. Who does 6 seconds in their car? 6? What car have you got? Oh, that's fast, 6 seconds fast. Typically, most cars about 12 seconds, something like that. And the difference between 1 second makes a lot of difference, 0 to 100. But anyway, performance feel, okay? Fuel economy, people know this, okay? Every time, they put fuel in their car, they know what it is. They don't, safety and cost. So these are kind of the attributes, right, that you need to, that's almost like the language that you need to use to talk to the customer when you're discussing with the customer what is it that they like. You don't say, how much torque do you want, whatever. You want to talk to them in terms of attribute. So the question then, how do you then cascade an attribute into an engineering speak? Okay, I'll just put an example in here which shows in essence, if you're wanting to improve performance feel, so how well the car drives over when you put your foot down, how do you translate that into engineering speak? Okay? So the first step really is to understand what element of the system which the customer is in contact with that might influence his perception of performance feel. So in that situation here, performance feel, if you look into there, could be pedal force, pedal effort, pedal travel. It could be the shift quality, okay? It could be the sound, even the sound, I mean, we could design a car which is really sounds almost like the electric car, but people won't like it because people like to hear the engine, like you've got a V8, okay, a V8. Idle quality, we can get our V8 to be totally smooth idle quality. But in there, we need to go pop, pop, pop. You need to do a lot pop, pop, pop. Because people who's driving V8 always like pop, 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 pop. Totally smooth is not good. It's a bloody muscly V8, So you need to know, even that perception of sound. It's like, the sound you get from BMW. It just feels good, You can hear that sound. It's, metallic. So all of that gets into the performance field. So if you're in the group of people who is designing the product to deliver performance field, you need to understand what element contribute to that performance field. And then when you talk about pedal effort, then you're starting to go down to the engineering speak now, traction force, weight, engine torque, whatever else, right? Then you can talk about all the losses. What are these that you need to focus on when you're designing? Because just remember, the engineer only has the ability to design at the component level. Because that's what we do, right? You need to design at the component level. You need to understand the tolerance, how your component fits together to create a system. But deep down, you design at the component level. So that's kind of like when you need to go down to. But in all of those, though, it's always important as you're going through that product development process to know that you cannot always get everything that you're aiming for. You need, throughout that development process, need to understand that there's always a trade-off, right? Balance out. Trade-off is very important because if you're not able to do a trade-off, you get stuck. Then the product development process just gets stuck. Sometimes you don't have enough money, so what do? I'm going to ask for more money. The finance guy says, no, you don't have anything. Well, you need to compromise your performance feel a little bit. What is that you're going to give? So you need to understand which part of all the different components that contribute to performance feel that has a minimum impact that could save you the money. So it's kind of like, okay, we doing for time? Yeah, okay, cool. Question?
So thank you very much, Philip. But before we say goodbye and give a round of applause, any questions?
Any question?
I have a question. What's the job opportunity like for young people wanting to enter into the automotive sector?
It's varied at the moment.
Even in not just Australia, but in the local region.
Oh, in the local region. Well, first the automotive industry. As you know, we don't do any manufacturing. There's no manufacturing job in Australian automotive industry. There's in Ford, we still have got quite a large team of engineers. We've got about 1,000 engineers designing cars for China, India, and now potentially for America, because we are exporting the Courier to different markets. So that's very varying. the problem I have is that I reckon that engineering job in automotive may still be here in 10 years, but without a manufacturing base to support it, its days are numbered. I think there's lots of job in manufacturing armament, right? Shipbuilding, frigate and all that kind of stuff. I think maybe the environment will become big. But also the other engineering job that's coming in, I think, potentially with medical, there's lots of engineering work. But the other stuff is really all in the IT, electronic stuff. Mining, yeah. Yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question.
You're a person who knows more about it than I do, so it's
but there's lots of potential in the region, though. Think about China and India, the big.
Could a graduate worked with the MUR racing team, top student, and opportunity to be an engineer in an automotive sector in Thailand, where they make SUVs and other places.
Yeah.
Compatible salaries, good salaries to the best of your knowledge.
Okay, so I must say India and Thailand, the salary are not very good. I think they're like. From memory, and that might have changed now the last time I look at it, an engineer in India or Thailand would be about maybe a third or half of the pay we get here. But having said that, the cost of living is much less there, right? So you can't equate one for one. If you're living there, it's good, but if you're earning to send back money here for your children to live, your family to live, it's just not possible. China used to be quite low, but it's picking up now. It's picking up, but really, I think it's really trying to get into an Australian company who's doing work for Asia and China, that kind of stuff.
Well, I hope that you would.
Any question, by the way, general question? I mean, I'm just telling you what I see in.
Yeah. One question from you.
Yeah.
In Ford, what kind of consumer base do you target? Is it more on the younger side or more on the older side?
Sorry, ask the question again.
The age group in Ford, what do you kind of target? What is your target age group?
There's no target of age group as per se, except that we stopped the graduate program for a number of years, but I think we started it back 4 years ago now. So we're taking a lot of young people as a graduate intake. So there's still that program that you can go through and see whether there's an opportunity to get in there. But there's not a target for age group, except that we're not pushing the older people away out anymore, because there's always. It's interesting. It's like there's still a shortage of trained and experienced people around. So yeah, there's not an age target. But I think it's still fairly difficult to get into the big corporation. You need to go through graduate testing, all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
We'll have to stop
there. But hang on, let's say maybe one thing. Okay. Maybe the best way to get into big corporation is go through agency, because we do employ contractors. So if you've got the right skill, the right background or whatever, it's easier to get into Ford to start with through an agency than through a graduate program. And that's a potential way of getting in.
Now, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
Before we thank Philip, don't forget, Philip's going to, with his next career, he's going to talk about mindfulness, professional, technical, focused mindfulness for the new age. Please come along, and when you do come along, please don't be insulted when I say down the front, please, so Philip can engage with you better.
If you're interested in mindfulness, for me, if you ask me among the 3 lectures that I give, probably the mindfulness was the one I would recommend, because it's very broad. It's for your wellness, for yourself.
Helps with study as well.
So,
now, if you've got a question, I'm sorry that I've sort of held you up, but if you've got a question, just wait out in the foyer and Philip will be out there to answer for us.
Sure.
In the meantime, thanks again, Philip.
All right, no problem. Thank you. Thank you.